Welcome to Zimpaper's television network for this, the last episode of Diplomatic Passport for the week. It's been a very phenomenal week. Of course, we've been looking at issues from mental health to, of course, those weekly updates that we always give you. My name is Robert Mkondiwa. And of course, this is Diplomatic Passport, as I said, your daily weekday COVID-19 show that keeps you abreast with issues on coronavirus, that epidemic, that pandemic rather, that hit us at the beginning of this year. And we'll be looking at it from a global perspective, from our regional perspective, and of course, as Zimbabwe, as a nation. As always, we start by taking a look at the statistics as availed to us by the Ministry of Health and Childcare, who, of course, are also sponsoring us this week on issues to do with mental health. Now, Zimbabwe has 7,951 confirmed cases of COVID-19, including 229 deaths and 6,446 recoveries, which puts the national recovery rate at 81%. Now, 929 PCR tests were done in the last 24 hours and 32 new cases were recorded. Now, these are all local transmission cases. Harare is still the epicenter with 3,265 cases, followed by Bulawayo, which now has 1,479 cases of COVID-19. Now, of course, Zimbabwe has recorded a significant decline in COVID-19 cases over the past month. Now, cases peaked in August with 3,243 infections confirmed, but in September, 1,426 cases were confirmed and were recorded, and that's almost half the cases on record in the previous month. Now, since the onset of the pandemic in March, these are the statistics that we're getting. Now, the Chief Coordinator of the National COVID-19 Response, Dr. Ignis Mahomba, said that the decline indicates effective preventative measures that, of course, are in place. Let's hear her speak.
We're doing well. We have worked hard to put in place systems, worked as a whole of government and society, not just government. Government itself specifically put in place measures at the very beginning of the pandemic. The social measures, the lockdowns, and so on. So we're beginning to see the results. In fact, global researchers that did surveys here in August actually confirmed that part of the reason why we delayed the epidemic and hence we're seeing some results is because of this early enactment of those measures. That's why.
Now, many of you have been asking us with regards to the situation, that limbo that we're in with regards to the education sector, and this is something that we're going to be focusing on. And one of the people, of course, who we tasked with going out and going around to see what the situation looks like, and you tasked in particular, was Takuzwa Chiambakwe, who actually gives us a report which he says that teachers, any teacher rather, who downs tools in Zimbabwe will find themselves without a salary. And this is something we woke up to today. And of course, this follows those weeks of inconclusive negotiations between the two parties, between government and her workers. And of course, they have reached this deadlock. Now, the parties are accusing each other of negotiating in bad faith, and teachers and the rest of the civil servant conglomerate are demanding a living wage and not the current salary of at least 4,900 RTGS dollars, which they say, of course, is below the poverty datum line, and that poverty datum line is currently pegged at 17,200 RTGS dollars. Now, the Public Service, Labour and Social Welfare Minister, Professor Paul Mavima, spoke to us and talked to us about these striking teachers and said that they actually may risk not being paid. Now, let's hear what he has to say before we go in depth in this issue.
In actual fact, we should already be doing that. Yeah, we should already be doing that. But we had been very magnanimous and said, let's find common ground. But His Excellency came out very clearly here in Manicaland yesterday to say we can't be held at ransom as a nation. It's good for people to go back and then continue to negotiate. Those who don't go back will not be paid.
So you heard that issue coming there from the minister, but with me here to talk about this issue in depth is Leroy Zenga. Now, Leroy, of course, you have been working with us and on the ground with regards issues to do with education and on other installments where, of course, we didn't have you on the panel. I would be with Takuzwa Chambak when we'll be talking about things like the head. That we knew things were going to get to a head. First and foremost, we were thinking, was government supposed to even go back to school, reopen? We saw places like Kenya, they've literally just forgotten that this year existed or anywhere other than on a calendar, and they decided to go, because of COVID-19, into a fresh new year. And there were always these underlying problems for us as a country, never mind the COVID, which is a good enough reason for us to regroup and come into a new year. But we pushed anyway, knowing we had underlying conditions, as it were, which are in essence economic. Do you think government did the right thing by reopening, and or should we have gone for other options?
Well, I think the idea behind reopening was anchored on the concept of time, because when people defer the whole year, it means that within the next 5 years, you're still going to have a lag. We're still going to have a gap that you need to fix. So by reopening early, I thought it was noble. Well, I'm still yet to properly grasp the mechanics going forward, but my thinking is that we should run this term and the following term into maybe around May, and then the academic year for 2020 finishes around May. It's not a misnomer. This is what happens with universities, and it can still be transpolated down to lower levels. I think that's a fair approach to ensure that learners grasp enough concepts as far as the curriculum is concerned, because we do not want to have a situation where learners satisfy a calendar provision without understanding the basic concepts that are important for their development.
Okay, totally makes sense and very lucidly put out and put together. And of course, we also have had a discussion that, because what you're saying is pretty much we're shifting the plates a little bit, but we're giving our pupils and students ample time to exhaust the syllabus and then be ready for an exam. And yet, without that, we're still going into examinations anyway. Now that's not exactly the way you had put it and the way you had seen it, as in running into the next year. Do you think this is practical? Just hitting the ground and going into an examination room?
Yeah, obviously there's an approach which is not used commonly, but it exists. The crash program approach, where learners are subjected to a high pressure regiment in their studies, and then they get to possibly finish their curriculum within a constricted time. It works when you have perhaps learners that are high performing. I'm not sure if it's going to be applicable to some who are not.
Which is what I wanted to get to, because there's always a type of person who is inclined to that, I will tell you, for example, I was the sort of student or pupil who would not write notes. And yet not every child has got that disposition. A lot of people prefer to write notes and read their notes. Now I can imagine a year when we say, well, we don't have any books whatsoever, let's go the Robert approach and have everybody just sit in a lecture theatre and listen. It's not going to work for everybody. And so this whole getting the crush program actually seems to have been taken and made a one size fits all. And that's problematic, is it not?
Yeah, I think it's an issue. If it were maybe up to me, how I'd put it across is, I don't think 3 months is enough. I don't think 3 months is enough. At least 4.5 months to 6 months would be enough. And for that to work, there's need for collaboration between parents and the teachers, so that when a child goes home, they're going to rest within reasonable time and get back to learning. They have to forgo their weekends. They have to forgo their social life, and that is an undertaking that needs buy-in. It needs a social contract of sorts. And right now you have teachers who are not there. So we've already lost a week or two. So it means that we have constricted time, and with each day that the issue of work and remuneration goes unsolved, we are losing more time, putting us in a more precarious position, if I may say.
Okay, and which brings us to, of course, where we are now. You're talking about a social contract between the parties, between the parents and the teachers, and you're also talking about students having to forego a lot of luxuries, including their social life. And which brings us to where we are now. We don't have the teachers to make a social contract with. They haven't pitched up, as you said. Well, the majority of them have not come to the party, and they're not in class. And we've got very disturbing images that are circulating on social media where students have got added social life, as it were. And really now government is saying, well, we are not going to talk to you if you're not in the classroom. Do you think that's going to work? It's carrot and stick. We will not pay you if you do not pitch. We will not give you the 4,900 that you're saying is paltry. Where do we go from here?
Well, I think it makes sense to me, though, for government to say that we are not going to pay you if you are not in class, because we have to be realistic. A lot of teachers within this time had created other sources of income, additional sources of income, and some are not coming because they are, within the comfort of whatever they were doing. Some had set up shops, some had started new ventures. So we are saying everyone is going to work, and people are not being paid to the tune of what they think they deserve across the whole country. But the negotiation has to go within the dictates of progress. If teachers are not going to be in class throughout, it means that even the reopening becomes futile, and we are racing against time. The negotiations, precedent has shown that negotiations end up yielding something. Perhaps they may not yield the 520 that the teachers are looking for, but there will be progress, I believe, because look at what nurses did. The health sector had terrible stories that we read. We cannot afford to have that in education because it is the base for anything that comes out of society.
Well, perhaps I would say, what if the teachers call the government's bluff and actually say, well, good enough, fair enough, we're not coming. I'm making more than the 4,900 you were giving to me. Pull the plug. It's not going to change anything. It's a couple of gigabytes or megabytes of airtime anyway. And they'd already gone into a new alternate economy, as you're saying. A lot of people decided to look for other things to do when COVID hit, and they're now proficient with whatever they're doing. And these are thousands upon thousands of people who were saying, well, if you don't go into this place, we won't give you this amount. And and it's now negligible to them if they're making living wages or living money from whatever they're doing. If they call the bluff and they don't walk into the classroom, would that not be an absolute catastrophe?
Yeah, it would be, because the truth is, on both parties, a zero-sum game doesn't work. These teachers, because we are running a very tight program, the experienced ones are going to be very useful and central to the strategy, because when this is a new curriculum, so we cannot say there's anyone with the content on their fingertips. It means that whenever a teacher goes home, they're going to grasp tomorrow's ideas. So within that spectrum, it's extra work. This is why these guys perhaps are very sensitive around issues to do with their warfare, because they know exactly what lies ahead. And then on the other hand,
it's a lot of hard work that they have to get into. It's a new era for teaching, as it were, is it not?
Yes, it's uncharted territory. And then you go to the other hand, it is $520. Perhaps it is not within the reach of the employer. It is not within the reach of the employer. So there has to be common ground. This common ground has to come in within the sense that how is everyone else who is functioning within their spaces across the economy getting paid? You look at other arms of the civil service itself. How are they surviving? Maybe notch up the salaries that the teachers get to that point, because the truth is some may have had luck in setting up alternatives, but it's not everyone. Some teachers are actually reliant and some are passionate, but it wouldn't help for for salaries to remain the same when prices of everything is going up.
I was about to say, because the passion, apart from the passion, those who are reliant, and is 4,900 a game for anything at all? Is it even the least incentive to say, well, to split? Because usually what happens when there's such job action in most cases, and a government or an employer says, you know what, if you don't come to work, I'm stopping the payroll. You usually see a split where some people think, you know what, but I actually need this, so I will go. And that divided house means the rest will then be forced to come to the negotiating table and things start to move. But perhaps even the poorest of the poor, if you tell them I'm going to stop 4,900 coming to you, will find it as inconsequential. Could there be somebody out there who still thinks 4,900 is something on which they can rely and could move them to actually leave their home and say, you know what, I'm breaking ranks with the rest of the team, the rest of my comrades, I'm going to work?
Okay, so this is how it works. You see, teacher unions over time have morphed into political organizations. So this is why their negotiations almost has tension with governments over time, because some of them have...
I like how you say almost has tension when we can actually touch the tension, but you're going almost.
Yeah.
But of course, I would like to think there is tension, which is almost palpable.
Yeah. So the idea is teachers, perhaps, teachers in their own right, they have to come up with a collective voice that is outside the framework of unions. Because supposedly there is someone who's saying, I'm okay with 13,000. I'm okay with 15,000. It would be a good movement from whatever I'm earning. But they cannot voice it out because the union has said 520 or nothing. So there's need for teachers and government to create a platform or rapport to talk outside the politicized spaces, the unions and the tripartite negotiating forum. There's need for frank conversation between government and its teachers, even if it means consultations outside to see what could be
but that's over 13,000 voices. Will that not be noise? Perhaps the unionizing and of course the tripartite negotiating forum is perhaps trying to just lessen the noise and lessen the voices.
You see, the problem with teacher unions, there's no leadership renewal in there. So some of the voices have been there for so long, they now think they decide on behalf of teachers. So if maybe there was democratization within the teacher union space, we would then have confidence that they're speaking on behalf of teachers. But when someone has been at the home for 15 years, 18 years, you cannot be competent to that level, within a union, because this is an employee body. So I think what teacher unions say, though noble, has to be taken with a pinch of salt, because their refusal to compromise when children are actually suffering has to be interrogated. In the same manner, we have to understand the dynamics that surrounding the negotiations. It's not like government has said they don't want to move the money up. They're saying, come back to work, provide the service, and then let's talk. Let's find each other.
And we were talking to Raymond Majongwe, and the come back to work and let's talk seems to have come to a point where it's chicken and egg. How do I come back to work when I cannot, when I literally, this money is not enough to move anything? You know what I mean? It's one transaction on mobile money. It's actually, it was seen as a restricted amount. So much so that it's inconsequential, because when government said you can't move anything more than 5,000 a day, a teacher doesn't even have enough to move in a day, and they have got another 29 or 30 or odd days in the month, and that pegging shows that amount was seen as inconsequential, and they then have to be asked to come back to work on something that they think is inconsequential. And it's chicken and egg. How do I come there if I don't have the means? Because what Raymond Majongwe was saying, and of course he's been at the helm of his body for quite a bit of time. I'd like to hear what he thinks of you saying there's no the leadership renewal. But he was also saying we've got people even stuck somewhere elsewhere who need to come back to Harare, need to come back to work, but with whatever they're earning, that's not even good enough to get them back home.
Yeah, like I said, that the 4.9, quite honestly, needs to be notched up. In the meantime, this is what these negotiations are supposed to serve. So it's not about 520 or nothing. Go through to the negotiating table. Tell these guys, look, we have 200 people who cannot move because they're in remote areas. And then because these people work within institutions, schools themselves, I mean, arrangements could be made supposedly to disperse money as allowances even through their respective institutions, because the headmaster would know that my teacher X is not really there. You know what I mean? What's needed right now is a practical approach to this issue, because if we are chasing ideals, we are not going to get them, because the economy is recovering in itself. So if you chase the 520, you're going to be told that we cannot give you the 520. But if you listen to what they can give you, and then you also say, no, can you notch it up? And then the negotiations come in. But these guys, because they want to remain popular within their spaces at the expense of practicability, they are pushing the 520 argument. Of course, incapacitation is valid in this case because you need to move around. But this is where now, even provisions like let's provide Zupco buses for teachers and students are coming in, but no one is willing to listen. I would rather the argument becomes directed towards ensuring that there's efficiency within that proposed system, so that there's movement. Because of course teachers want 520, but the parents that are even paying the fees, right, are not getting commensurate amounts in their specific areas. So what it would mean is that teachers, with respect, they deserve to be paid because everything anchors on them. But it has to be a gradual process to get to the ideal amount.
Perhaps we do know what the teachers say they want, whether it's ludicrous or otherwise, we know their figure. Perhaps we also need to hear what government has put forward on the table that has had people dissolve those talks. So I think that's something that we also need to follow up on and look at in the following days, and of course perhaps actively next week, because there must be something that has been offered and there must be that something that has been refused. Just possibly as a final, I want to know what you would do. Let's put yourself in their position. You're a teacher. The government has said you either come to work for 4,900 and we start talking, and there's no guarantee of what when we are going to agree, or you stay at home. What would you do if you were put in their shoes?
As a teacher, I would go back to work. I'd go back to work because I'd go back to work and then the negotiations happen. Because the truth is, some of these things that people are doing in the interim are not sustainable long term as a means of survival. You still need that that buffer. And these are professionals. These are people who studied, who went through the paces to get whatever that they know. So there's need for them also to think about the return on investment on their their investment as far as their education is concerned. These are professionals. A professional feels better when they're in a professional space. So I would rather, because parents right now, they are restive. Because your child is still going to get the statement of entry, your child is still going to write on 1 December or whatever date that's there. And you know that there's no movement between government and the teachers. Perhaps the parents themselves also need to come to the table. And because the other thing is the fees that are being paid are fairly low. So there's need also to notch those fees up to ensure that the education value chain kickstarts again. The money that comes in can help even to push up the salaries that the teachers get. And then realign the teachers with everyone else in the civil service. Whatever the civil servants in other departments are getting, just push it up. If they are 75 COVID-19 allowances that are there, cost of living allowances that are there, make sure the teachers get them as well, so that at least they don't feel a gap between them and their civil service colleagues. I'm sure there'll be progress from there.
Leroy Zenga, always a pleasure having you here, and definitely we shall be engaging you as we go forward, because we really want to see finality in this issue. Our children and subsequently our future has been held to ransom by two warring parties, perhaps even three, with the parents in that matrix. And that brings us to the end of Diplomatic Passport for this week. Certainly we'll be joining you next week. Keep those comments coming, especially on the issue of the reopening of the schools and that deadlock between government, where government is saying for 4,900 Zimbabwe dollars, come back to work and let's start talking, or we'll stop paying you that money. And the teachers saying they're going nowhere fast. Now keep those comments coming to my Twitter handle, that's at ZimRobbie, that's ZIMROBBIE, or robinkondiwa@gmail.com. And let's get to talking, and let's make sure that we get all the best results, because our future really depends on it. Our future is in the hands of our children. Have a great weekend, and see you at the top of the next week as we continue looking at issues in our new normal here on Diplomatic Passport.